Should I stop masturbating when I'm breaking free from porn addiction? This is the topic we're going to be covering on the Unhooked podcast today. So, stay tuned. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz. And on today's podcast, I'm going to be answering a question that I often get from men who are starting their journey of breaking free from porn addiction. And this actually comes from a listener, someone who submitted a question over Instagram. And so I want to read what this listener sent in. Hi, Jeremy. I recently found your podcast and I found it both very inspiring and motivating. I'm dealing with my own addiction right now. And although I have had cognitive behavioral therapy, and for the most part, I'm often able to withstand urges, I find myself occasionally falling into them due to a plethora of reasons. Sometimes I slack on my regular routine, which makes my overall control or mindfulness lack. Or sometimes it's just temporary situations which lead to it. For example, living alone for a few weeks and feeling a bit lonely. I've developed a good response pattern to my mind state when I have a relapse, but one thing is inconsistent deliberation. When first going cold turkey off porn or illicit images, should I completely stop masturbating as well? I'd love to hear your take, as masturbating can be healthy, but it is obviously linked to the same neural pathways as porn or illicit images. So is taking a long break from it alongside porn the best option? So this is the topic we're going to be covering today. Again, it's something that comes up for a lot of people. They realize the harm of porn and they want to break free from porn. And they're wondering, should I also stop masturbating when I'm breaking free? So the question is, what do you do? Well, in my opinion, and I'm just going to give you my opinion, I'm not saying it is the only right opinion. As I'm going to talk about later in this episode, there are some different approaches and there are different nuances to it. There are pros and cons to each approach. But in my opinion, it's not necessary to quit masturbating when you want to break free from porn. And in fact, I typically recommend allowing yourself to masturbate when you're in your early stages of recovery, to give yourself that freedom to masturbate as much as you want. And I'm going to talk about how to do that in a skillful way soon. But I will say that you can take on not masturbating as a challenge if you are feeling called to it. And at the end of this podcast, I'll mention a few reasons why you might want to undertake this as a challenge or an experiment and how to do that successfully. So first, a little more info about why is it not necessary to stop masturbating. The main reason is because masturbation on its own isn't an unhealthy behavior. This is something that is so important to understand, particularly in my approach to recovery from porn addiction, is that we are sexual beings. That does not make you a bad person. It does not make you a sinner. This is not a religious approach where we're saying if you have sexual thoughts, then you are sinning. That's not the approach that works for me, for many people who are listening to this podcast. And instead to embrace your sexuality, to understand that sexuality is a beautiful part of being human. And masturbation is one component of that. And it can be unhealthy, but it's also can be very healthy, masturbating. So what we're talking about here is breaking free from porn addiction and breaking free from addiction or very unhealthy behaviors. When we're looking at masturbation, it's simply hard to be addicted to masturbation without porn. This is something that's very important to understand. For most people, their whole lives, they've been intermingled and intermixed. Porn and masturbation have been almost synonymous. When you have one, you have the other. But what we find is that if you remove porn, it is very hard to overdo it on masturbation. It's very hard to get it to the place where it is causing major harm in your life. And then what's more true is that the influence of porn is what's causing most of the damage. In many ways, the comparison here is like masturbation to porn is like fruit to junk food. It's hard to overdo it on fruit. It's hard to binge and get completely obese if you're just eating fruit, because at some point you can only take so much and your body just doesn't respond to it in the same way. But with junk food, with potato chips and chocolate and cookies, you can just kind of keep downing it. The same is true from porn. Even when you are no longer genuinely horny, you can just keep going. You can spend hours and hours a day. And also what we see again with that habituation is you end up getting into more and more extreme things. And so these are some of the harms of porn addiction that is hard to actually experience with masturbation. I will say that there are cases where masturbation can become unhealthy when it's not linked to porn, but those are very rare, and chances are you are not going to get to that place. So, what else do I want to say about this is the other reason that I don't recommend people trying to stop masturbating while they're quitting porn is that it just makes it more challenging. One of the important things when we're talking about recovery science and habit change and lasting behavior change is in the beginning, making it easy for yourself. Making the steps small so that you can get those wins and you can see progress. If you try to bite off more than you can chew in the beginning, it's going to be defeating. You're going to lose confidence because it's just challenging. It is very challenging to break free from both porn and masturbation in the very beginning. Again, later on this episode, I'll talk about why you might want to do it, but just understanding you don't have to. And that the more important thing is to break free from porn, which is causing more of the harm in your relationships, in your mind, in your mental health. So again, going back to habit change and the science of lasting behavior change, making it small, making it easy. The first thing you can do is just stop watching porn. Your body's not going to be able to overdo it on masturbation alone. What I like to tell my clients when they're doing this is let yourself masturbate as much as you want in the early stages. What you'll find is that if you can't masturbate without porn, then you're not genuinely horny. And if you can masturbate without porn, it just means that you might be horny. And again, you're not going to overdo it. So giving yourself that permission is very helpful. Now, that being said, what are the reasons that you might want to try quitting masturbation at the same time? Well, a couple reasons. One is if you are interested in the topics of semen retention, if you're interested in these topics of sexual transmutation, they can be interesting things to explore. For some people, it's a lifelong practice that they get into semen retention. For some, it is an experiment to see, what is it like to explore not ejaculating for 30 days. So just to explore that, some of you might be interested in that crossover, but that's not everyone. Not everyone who quits porn also needs to become a Taoist master in semen retention and, non-ejaculation and multiple orgasms. It's all power to you if you want to get into that, but you don't have to. The other reason you might want to get into it, try breaking free from masturbation when you're breaking free from porn, is if you do feel that for some reason the masturbation itself is unhealthy or causing major harm in your life. An important point to pay attention to here is to make sure that this isn't coming from a place of sexual shame, that it's not coming from a place of thinking that fantasizing about women is a bad thing, or that having sexual thoughts is a bad thing. Because one of the most important things you can do in your recovery is to make space for your sexuality, to understand it's okay to have sexual thoughts. It's okay to fantasize. It's okay to be attracted to other people. What we don't want to get into is, falling too much into the lust. And, I'm going to do another podcast episode on the difference between lust and attraction because they're important to understand. But just understanding that having a sexual attraction to other people is fine. Fantasizing is fine. Doesn't make you a bad person. But if you still feel that masturbation is causing excessive harm in your life, more harm than it would do, the harm of trying to stop, which can also cause harm when you're repressing and fighting back, and then that's something to look into. So again, the reasons you might want to try is if you're just curious about breaking free from masturbation as well. If you're curious about semen retention, those are some reasons you might want to get into it. So to wrap things up again, my recommendation, if you are quitting porn, if you're going cold turkey, don't worry about quitting masturbation. And in fact, allow yourself to masturbate as much as you want. You won't be able to do it. Again, it's like you can't get obesely fat if all you're allowing yourself is to eat fruits. Fruits, you can only eat so many mangoes before at some point your body gets bored of it and you just don't do it. But with potato chips, candy, cookies, chocolate, you can just keep going. So I hope that's helpful in understanding the difference there. So for all of you out there listening, I hope that gives you some insight on this topic of the difference between masturbation and porn, and should you stop masturbating when you are quitting porn. It's not necessary, but you can do it if you want to explore what is it like to break free from this? What is it like to look at my relationship to masturbation, or to look at my relationship with ejaculation, semen retention, all of these things. So that is it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode on Unhooked. And as a side note to this particular episode was inspired by a listener, someone just like you, who wrote in on Instagram and just sent me a DM and said, hey, this is something I'm curious about. And so if you have a question that you would like answered, send me a DM. Go ahead and find me on Instagram and just shoot me a message and say, hey, here's what I'm struggling with. Here's a question I have. I would love to hear your advice on it. And I just may turn it into a podcast episode. As always, if you enjoy these podcasts, please consider giving it a review on Apple Podcasts. I know it is a bit hard to find how to give a review on Spotify, if it is even possible. But if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or maybe send this podcast to a friend who might find it helpful, it would mean the world to me. It really does help a lot. So that's it for today. It's a beautiful sunny day in Amsterdam, and I am going to go to the rock climbing gym after this. So with that, without further ado, I am signing off, and I will catch you guys on the next episode.